The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of courtroom 305, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly at the defendant's table, her dark fingers lightly drumming against her laptop bag. At 32 years old, she had never expected to find herself here, facing charges of cyber intrusion into the city's network. The courtroom buzzed with the usual morning activity: lawyers shuffling papers, clerks typing rapidly on their computers, and other defendants waiting nervously for their cases to be called. Sarah, however, maintained a calm demeanor, knowing the truth behind her actions that night. Judge Richard Harrison entered the courtroom, his silver hair and black robe a stark contrast against the light wood paneling behind him. At 65, he had seen thousands of cases, and one glance at Sarah made him internally sigh. Another young person thinking they could outsmart the system, he thought to himself. Case number 2347, City versus Sarah Mitchell, the court clerk announced, her voice echoing through the now quiet room. Sarah stepped forward, dressed in what she considered her casual work attire: dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers. She had come straight from an all-night emergency response session with barely enough time to grab her documentation. Judge Harrison peered down at her over his reading glasses. Ms. Mitchell, you're charged with unauthorized access to city networks at 2:30 a.m. last Tuesday. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, Sarah replied firmly, reaching for her laptop bag. If I could explain the situation. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying a hint of condescension. Do you have legal representation today? I'll be representing myself, Your Honor. I have documentation that proves. Young lady, the judge cut in again, do you understand the seriousness of cybercrime in today's world? The city's networks contain sensitive information about thousands of citizens. Sarah took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. Yes, Your Honor, I'm actually quite familiar with. The logs show your IP address accessing restricted areas of the network. Judge Harrison continued, barely glancing at the papers before him. The evidence seems quite clear. The prosecutor, a young man in a crisp suit, stood up. Your Honor, we have logs showing multiple access attempts from the defendant's location. The city takes these breaches very seriously. Sarah tried once more. Your Honor, if you would just look at my credentials and the security clearance documentation. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Harrison's voice grew stern. I've seen many young people who think their computer skills put them above the law. This court takes a firm stance against cyber intrusion. The young woman's shoulders tensed slightly, but her voice remained steady. Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. I was actually working on. That's enough, Judge Harrison declared, tapping his gavel lightly. Based on the evidence presented and your apparent lack of understanding of the seriousness of this offense, I'm imposing a fine of $10,000 and 100 hours of community service. Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned by the judge's refusal to even review her documentation. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her, being punished for doing her job, and doing it well. Your Honor, she tried one final time, I have official documentation from. Ms. Mitchell, if you continue to argue, I'll hold you in contempt. Judge Harrison warned, already reaching for the next case file. Pay the fine within 30 days and report to the probation office for your community service assignment. Next case. As Sarah gathered her things, she noticed the sympathetic look from the court clerk. She had seen this before: the assumptions, the dismissal, the refusal to look beyond appearances. But this time was different. This time, they had made a mistake that would soon become apparent to everyone. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright morning sun, Sarah pulled out her phone. She had several missed calls from her team and the city's chief information officer. There was also an email confirming her keynote speech at next week's National Cybersecurity Conference, the same conference where Judge Harrison was scheduled to attend a judicial technology training session. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she headed to her car. Sometimes, life had a way of correcting injustices on its own. She had work to do, and soon enough, Judge Harrison would understand exactly who he had dismissed in his courtroom today. 1 week later, Judge Richard Harrison walked into the grand ballroom of the Riverside Convention Center, adjusting his name tag. The National Cybersecurity Conference wasn't his usual scene. but the Judicial Board had insisted all judges attend at least one technology training session this year. He found a seat near the back of the room, pulling out his notebook and pen. Around him, hundreds of technology professionals chatted excitedly, their conversations filled with terms he barely understood. He felt out of place in his business suit among the casual attire of the tech crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conference moderator approached the podium. "Please welcome our keynote speaker. She's been named one of Time magazine's 40 Under 40 for her groundbreaking work in cybersecurity. As the founder and CEO of SecureNet Solutions, she's protected major government institutions from countless cyber attacks. Please welcome Sarah Mitchell." Judge Harrison's head snapped up at the name. It couldn't be the same person, he thought. But as Sarah walked onto the stage, his coffee cup nearly slipped from his fingers. There she was, the same young woman he had found just a week ago, now commanding the attention of hundreds of professionals. She looked different today, but not in the way he expected. She wore the same casual style, dark jeans and a simple blazer, but carried herself with an authority that filled the room. Her natural hair was pulled back neatly, and a slight smile played on her lips as she approached the podium. "Thank you all for being here," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "Last week, my team prevented what could have been the largest cyber attack on our city's infrastructure. We detected unusual activity in the power grid's control systems at 2:30 a.m. last Tuesday." Judge Harrison's stomach dropped. The date and time matched exactly with her supposed offense. Working through the night, Sarah continued, "We traced the intrusion attempt to a group of international hackers. By accessing multiple network points simultaneously, we were able to block their attack and protect sensitive data of thousands of citizens." The judge's pen fell from his suddenly limp fingers. He remembered his own words in the courtroom. The city's networks contained sensitive information about thousands of citizens. He had lectured her about the very thing she had been protecting. As Sarah shared technical details of the operation, the audience hung on every word. She displayed complex diagrams and explained sophisticated security protocols, answering detailed questions from other experts with ease. Judge Harrison understood barely half of what she said, but he understood enough to realize the magnitude of his mistake. After the presentation, he watched as top government officials and tech industry leaders crowded around her. The chief information officer of the city, the same city whose networks he had accused her of attacking, shook her hand warmly and posed for photos. "Impressive speaker, isn't she?" a man in the next seat commented. "She's been consulting with the FBI's cyber division for years. Half the security protocols used by federal courts were developed by her team." Judge Harrison felt the weight of every dismissive word he had spoken in his courtroom. He thought about how he had cut her off, refused to look at her documentation, and threatened her with contempt when she tried to explain. As the crowd began to disperse, he saw Sarah gathering her materials at the podium. Their eyes met briefly across the room. She gave him a small, knowing nod before turning to speak with another group of admirers. Walking out of the conference room, Judge Harrison felt decades older than when he had walked in. His mind raced with questions about how many other times his assumptions had led him to wrong conclusions. How many other people had he silenced before hearing their full story? In his pocket, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the Judicial Review Board, requesting his presence at an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. The subject line read, Sarah Mitchell Case Review. The truth was finally coming to light, and Judge Harrison knew his comfortable world was about to change dramatically. The next morning, Judge Harrison sat uncomfortably in the Judicial Review Board's conference room. The morning sun streamed through large windows, but he felt no warmth from it. 5 senior board members sat across from him, their faces serious as they reviewed the documents before them. "Judge Harrison," began Chief Justice Martinez, "we've received some concerning information about your handling of the Sarah Mitchell case." She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at him. "The FBI's Cybersecurity Division has sent us quite an interesting report." A thick folder was passed to Judge Harrison. As he opened it, his eyes widened. Inside were detailed reports, security clearances, and government contracts, all bearing Sarah Mitchell's name and signature. "Let me explain what really happened that night," said a familiar voice. Sarah Mitchell walked into the room, followed by the city's chief of police and the FBI's regional director. She wore a professional black suit today, carrying her ever-present laptop bag. "May I?" Sarah gestured to the screen on the wall. After receiving a nod from Chief Justice Martinez, she connected her laptop and brought up a series of complex diagrams. At 2:15 a.m. last Tuesday, our systems detected unusual activity in the city's power grid, Sarah began, her voice calm and professional. A group of hackers from overseas was attempting to gain control of critical infrastructure. Their plan was to shut down power to hospitals, police stations, and emergency services. The room fell silent as security camera footage played on the screen, showing Sarah and her team working through the night in their emergency command center. We had 15 minutes to stop them, she continued. The only way to block their attack was to access multiple network points simultaneously. Yes, I did access the city's network, because I'm the person who designed its security system 3 years ago. Judge Harrison's face flushed as Sarah pulled up a copy of her government contract and security clearance. "These are the documents I tried to show you in court, Your Honor," she said quietly. "We couldn't announce the attack publicly because we were still tracking the hackers. That's why I couldn't explain everything in open court." The FBI regional director stepped forward. "Ms. Mitchell's team not only prevented a potentially catastrophic attack, but also helped us identify and locate the hacker group. Thanks to their work, we arrested 3 suspects yesterday." Chief Justice Martinez turned to Judge Harrison. "Do you understand the gravity of this situation? You find and sentence someone who was literally protecting our city, all without reviewing her documentation or allowing her to explain." Judge Harrison's voice faltered. "I made assumptions that were completely wrong." "Wrong doesn't begin to cover it," the police chief added. "Ms. Mitchell's firm handles cybersecurity for half the police departments in the state. She has higher security clearance than anyone in this room." Sarah pulled up one final document on the screen, a copy of the court transcript from her case. "Your Honor, I don't want you to lose your position over this. What I want is change. Real change in how our courts handle technology-related cases and how judges approach defendants regardless of their appearance." The review board members exchanged glances. Chief Justice Martinez nodded slowly. "Ms. Mitchell has made a reasonable request," she said. "Judge Harrison, you will withdraw the fine and clear all charges immediately. Additionally, you will work with Ms. Mitchell to develop a training program for our judges on modern technology and implicit bias." "There's one more thing," Sarah added, opening her laptop bag. She pulled out a thick bundle of files. "While preparing for this meeting, I reviewed the last 5 years of Judge Harrison's technology-related cases. I found a concerning pattern of similar bias, particularly against young people and minorities." Judge Harrison felt the weight of every eye in the room. The truth wasn't just emerging. It was flooding out like a broken dam, washing away years of unchecked assumptions and prejudices. As Sarah began displaying the case statistics on screen, Judge Harrison realized this meeting wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about facing uncomfortable truths and making real changes. The hard work was just beginning. That evening, Judge Harrison sat alone in his office, surrounded by case files. The setting sun cast long shadows across his desk, where Sarah Mitchell's statistical analysis lay open. He had been reviewing his past cases for hours, and each page revealed something that made his stomach twist with shame. He picked up another file, a case from 6 months ago. A young Hispanic woman had been charged with credit card fraud when she was actually trying to recover her own hacked accounts. He had dismissed her explanation without even looking at her bank statements. 3 months before that, he had handed a harsh sentence to a young black man for supposed computer trespassing, when the man had been hired to test a company's security systems. "How many lives have I affected?" he whispered to the empty room, running his hands through his silver hair. His computer screen showed an email from Chief Justice Martinez, requesting a complete review of all his technology-related cases from the past 5 years. A knock on his office door startled him. His clerk, Jenny, stood in the doorway with a concerned look on her face. "Judge Harrison, it's past 8 o'clock. Are you okay?" she asked, stepping into the room. Jenny had worked with him for 15 years, and she had never seen him look so troubled. "Jenny," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something honest. Have you ever noticed me being unfair to certain defendants?" Jenny shifted uncomfortably, then pulled up a chair. "Do you want the polite answer or the truth?" "After today, I think I've had enough politeness. I need the truth." "Well," Jenny began carefully. There was that time last year when 2 college students were charged with similar computer crimes. The white student from the suburbs got community service. The black student from downtown got jail time. Several of us noticed, but nobody felt they could tell me. Judge Harrison finished. He picked up Sarah's analysis again. Ms. Mitchell found 15 similar cases in just the last year. 15 times I gave harsher sentences to minorities for the same offenses. Jenny nodded slowly. The Sarah Mitchell case has really affected you, hasn't it? Today, I learned that someone I dismissed as just another troublemaker is actually a national security expert who protects our city. He gestured to his computer. I've been reading about her work. She's consulted for the White House, developed security systems for major banks, and even helped prevent international cyber attacks. And I treated her like a criminal because I saw what I expected to see. A young black woman in casual clothes, and I immediately assumed I knew her story. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. How many other Sarah Mitchells have I misjudged? Jenny stood and gathered some of the scattered files. What are you going to do now? First, I'm going to review every single case Ms. Mitchell flagged in her analysis. Any unjust sentences will need to be corrected. He turned back to his desk and opened his laptop. Then, I'm going to write a formal apology, not just to Ms. Mitchell, but to every person I've wronged through my bias. That's going to be a lot of work, Jenny said quietly. It should be. Easy fixes aren't what's needed here. He pulled up his calendar, which showed his first training session with Sarah scheduled for next week. I've spent years making quick judgments from the bench. Now it's time to slow down and really look at the people in my courtroom. As Jenny left, Judge Harrison noticed a new email from Sarah Mitchell. She had attached detailed information about implicit bias training and modern technology education for the judicial system. The subject line read, "It's never too late to learn and change." He clicked reply and began typing. Dear Ms. Mitchell, thank you for helping me see what I've been blind to for so long. I know an apology isn't enough, but I hope you'll help me become the kind of judge who truly serves justice for everyone. Outside his window, the city continued to buzz with activity, unaware that in this quiet office, a man who had spent decades judging others was finally judging himself. The downtown cafe was quiet at 3 p.m., just as Sarah had requested for their meeting. Judge Harrison arrived 15 minutes early, nervously straightening his tie as he chose a table near the window. This wasn't a formal court meeting. Sarah had suggested a neutral location where they could talk openly. He watched her arrive, noting how differently he saw her now. She walked with purpose, her laptop bag over one shoulder, dressed in the same casual style he had once judged so harshly. Several cafe patrons nodded to her in recognition. She was clearly a regular here. Judge Harrison, she greeted him with a small smile, sliding into the seat across from him. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Ms. Mitchell, I want to start by apologizing again, he began, but Sarah held up her hand. Before we get to that, I want you to understand something. She ordered a coffee from the approaching waitress, then continued. I agreed to help with the judicial training program because I've seen too many people like me get unfair treatment in court. But for this to work, you need to understand where I'm coming from. Judge Harrison nodded, picking up his own coffee cup to hide his discomfort. I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to share it. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of a small house with peeling paint. This is where I grew up, in the east side of the city. My mom worked 2 jobs, but she always made sure we had a computer at home. She said technology was the future. She swiped to another photo, a young Sarah, maybe 12 years old, surrounded by computer parts. I started fixing computers for neighbors when I was 11. By 13, I was helping small businesses set up their networks. The local library gave me free internet access, and I taught myself coding. That's remarkable, Judge Harrison said softly. What's remarkable is that I made it at all, Sarah replied. Do you know how many times I was stopped by security while working on client sites? How many potential clients saw my face and suddenly decided they didn't need help? Even after I got my degrees and security clearances, people still see me and make assumptions. The judge looked down at his coffee. Like I did. Yes, Sarah said firmly. Like you did. I have 3 degrees, including a doctorate in cybersecurity. I've worked with the FBI, NSA, and major corporations. But in your courtroom, none of that mattered because you didn't even look at my credentials. I can't defend my actions, Judge Harrison admitted. But I want to understand, why are you willing to help me now? Sarah leaned back, considering her words carefully. Because you're not the first judge who's made this mistake, but you're the first one I've seen really want to change. Most people in power get defensive when their bias is exposed. You didn't. She pulled out her laptop and opened it, turning it to show him a series of photographs. These are some of my team members. Different races, backgrounds, ages. Many of them came from tough circumstances like mine. They're brilliant at what they do, but they still face the same prejudices I did. Judge Harrison studied the faces on the screen, seeing them with new eyes. You're hoping the training program will help prevent what happened to you from happening to them. Exactly. Sarah closed her laptop. The tech world is changing fast, Judge Harrison. The next generation of cybersecurity experts might not look like what you expect. They might be kids from the projects who taught themselves coding, or single moms who learned it while working night shifts. She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. This is my proposal for the judicial training program. It's not just about technology education. It's about breaking down the assumptions that almost let criminals damage our city because a judge wouldn't listen to a young black woman in casual clothes. For the first time since the meeting began, Judge Harrison saw a flash of the pain his actions had caused. Behind Sarah's professional demeanor was someone who had fought against prejudice her entire life. I'm ready to learn, he said simply. Where do we begin? 2 months after their cafe meeting, Sarah stood at the front of the largest courtroom in the city. Instead of defendants and lawyers, the room was filled with judges, court administrators, and legal professionals. Every seat was taken, with people even standing along the walls. Today, we're launching the most comprehensive reform of how our courts handle technology-related cases, Sarah announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Behind her, a large screen displayed the new program's logo. Justice in a Digital Age. Judge Harrison sat in the front row, nodding encouragingly. He had helped Sarah develop this program, spending countless hours reviewing past cases and identifying where the system had failed. Let me show you what happened last week in a nearby city, Sarah continued, clicking to a new slide. A 17-year-old was arrested for hacking his school's computer system. The judge was ready to send him to juvenile detention. But because of our pilot program, a tech expert was consulted first. She paused, letting the image of a young teen sink in. They discovered he wasn't hacking at all. He was trying to create a more accessible website for his classmate who was blind. He didn't know the proper channels to go through, but his intentions were good. Instead of punishment, he's now interning with the school district's IT department. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Judge Harrison watched his colleagues' reactions, remembering his own journey of understanding. Our new system has 3 main parts, Sarah explained, counting off on her fingers. First, every court will have access to a panel of tech experts who can review cases within 24 hours. No more rushed judgments based on misunderstanding of technology. She clicked to the next slide, showing a diverse group of tech professionals. Second, we're creating a database of common tech-related cases and their proper handling. Judges will have clear guidelines for understanding modern technology issues. Several judges were taking notes now, their faces showing genuine interest. Sarah had managed to make complex tech concepts simple enough for everyone to understand. Finally, she continued, and most importantly, we're implementing mandatory training for all court officials about both technology and implicit bias. Judge Harrison, would you like to speak about this part? Judge Harrison stood and walked to the podium, facing his peers. 2 months ago, I made a terrible mistake. I let my assumptions about what a tech expert should look like cloud my judgment. I almost punished someone who was protecting our city, all because I didn't take the time to look past my own bias. The room fell silent as he spoke. Since then, I've learned that the face of technology is changing. The next person in your courtroom might be a teenage programmer, a self-taught security expert from a tough neighborhood, or someone who doesn't fit your idea of what an expert looks like. Sarah stepped forward again, pulling up a new screen filled with statistics. In the past year alone, our city has seen over 300 tech-related cases. Our analysis shows that minorities and young defendants received harsher sentences for similar offenses. This has to change. She clicked through several slides showing success stories from their pilot program. When judges had access to tech experts and proper training, the disparity in sentencing dropped by 80%. We saw more fair outcomes, better understanding of modern technology issues, and even identified several cases where defendants were actually doing positive work in cybersecurity. The Chief Justice stood up from her seat. I've reviewed Ms. Mitchell's proposal thoroughly. Starting next month, these changes will be mandatory for all courts in our jurisdiction. We can't afford to let bias or lack of understanding compromise justice. Sarah smiled, showing a final slide with training schedules and expert contact information. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. The world of technology moves fast, and our legal system needs to keep up, not just with the technology itself, but with the diverse group of people who work with it. As the presentation ended and questions began, Judge Harrison watched Sarah handle each inquiry with patience and expertise. The room full of legal professionals who might have dismissed her 2 months ago now hung on her every word. Real change was happening, one courtroom at a time. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. From defendant to defender, how bias in court led to revolutionary change. Read the headline of the National Law Review. Within hours, news outlets across the country picked up the story of Sarah Mitchell and Judge Harrison. Sarah sat in her office, watching as her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. On her computer screen, a video of her recent court reform presentation had gone viral, reaching over 1 million views overnight. The comments section was filled with similar stories from people who had faced prejudice in the legal system. Ms. Mitchell. Her assistant poked her head in. CNN is on line 1, and Good Morning America wants you for tomorrow's show. Also, 3 more court systems have called about implementing a reform program. Before Sarah could respond, her phone lit up with a text from Judge Harrison. Have you seen the morning news? Our story is everywhere. People are finally talking about the right things. He wasn't wrong. On her office TV, a panel of experts was discussing the implications of their reform program. The screen showed split images: Sarah's keynote speech at the Cybersecurity conference, Judge Harrison's courtroom, and clips from their new training sessions. This isn't just about technology in courts anymore, a legal analyst was saying. This is about recognizing that expertise and talent don't look like what we might expect. The Mitchell-Harrison case is forcing us to confront our biases across the entire justice system. Sarah's email inbox was flooding with messages. Some were from young people sharing their own stories of being misjudged. Others were from judges and lawyers asking how they could bring the reform program to their cities. But the one that caught her eye was from a teenage girl in Detroit. Dear Ms. Mitchell, I'm 16 and love coding. Last month, I found a security flaw in my school's system. Instead of reporting it, I stayed quiet because I was afraid nobody would believe me. After seeing your story, I showed my principal the problem. Now I'm helping them fix it. Thank you for showing me that people like me can be heard. Sarah smiled, remembering her own teenage years. As she began typing a response, her assistant appeared again. The mayor's office called. They want to present you with the City Innovation Award. And Judge Harrison is being considered for a National Justice Reform Committee position. On the TV, the story had spread to other networks. Videos were surfacing of other cases where bias had led to wrong judgments in tech-related cases. Social media was buzzing with hashtags like #TechJustice and #ListenFirst. Look at this, Judge Harrison texted again, sharing a link. Sarah clicked it to find an open letter signed by over 200 judges nationwide, committing to implementing similar reforms in their courts. The letter acknowledged past mistakes and promised to do better. Her phone rang. It was the dean of her old university's law school. Ms. Mitchell, we'd like to create a new course combining technology and legal ethics. Would you consider being a guest lecturer? As Sarah handled the calls and messages, she noticed something changing in the public conversation. People weren't just talking about her case anymore. They were sharing their own experiences, suggesting improvements, and demanding change in their local courts. That evening, she received an unexpected email from the court clerk who had been present during her original hearing. The clerk had attached a photo from that morning's traffic court, showing a young Asian woman in casual clothes presenting her tech credentials to a judge. The message read, "The judge listened to her full explanation. Your story changed things here. Thank you." Judge Harrison called as Sarah was preparing to leave the office. "The state Supreme Court wants to make our program mandatory for all judges in the state," he said, his voice excited. "Sarah, this is bigger than we imagined." "It had to be," she replied, looking out her office window at the city lights. "One case might make headlines, but real change happens when everyone starts seeing things differently." On her desk, the pile of speaking invitations and interview requests grew larger. But what made Sarah smile most was a new frame on her wall, her original court summons, mounted next to the announcement of the new judicial reform program. Below it, she had written a simple note: "Sometimes being judged wrong leads to making things right." 1 year later, the National Judicial Conference's main hall was packed with over 1,000 judges, lawyers, and legal professionals from across the country. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as Judge Harrison and Sarah Mitchell took the stage together, an unlikely pair who had transformed the legal system's approach to technology and bias. A year ago, Judge Harrison began, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "I was a judge who thought he knew everything. I had been on the bench for 30 years. But in one morning, my entire worldview changed because I refused to listen to the woman standing next to me." Sarah stepped forward, sharing a knowing smile with him before turning to the audience. "And a year ago, I was a cybersecurity expert who had just been fined for doing my job. Today, we're here to show you how that mistake led to changes in over 500 courts across America." The large screen behind them displayed their impressive statistics: 70% reduction in biased sentencing in tech-related cases, over 2,000 judges trained in modern technology understanding, more than 300 tech experts now serving as court consultants. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," Sarah continued, clicking to a new slide. "Let me show you what real change looks like." The screen showed a series of photographs: a young Hispanic teenager receiving an award for helping his local police department improve their cybersecurity, a black woman in a hoodie teaching a room full of judges about blockchain technology, a judge consulting with a panel of diverse tech experts before making a ruling. "These are the faces of our new justice system," Judge Harrison explained. "Every person you see here might have been dismissed or misjudged a year ago. Today, they're vital parts of making our courts work better." Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up a live feed. "Right now, courts in 20 different cities are using our program. Let's check in with some of them." The screen split into multiple windows, showing courtrooms across the country. In each one, tech experts from different backgrounds were working alongside judges, helping them understand complex digital cases. "Remember that teenage girl from Detroit who wrote to me last year?" Sarah asked, pointing to one feed. "That's her, now leading her school district's cybersecurity team. And that judge who looked so interested in her presentation. He used to dismiss teenage defendants without hearing them out." Judge Harrison stepped forward again. "But the most important change isn't in our courtrooms, it's in our minds. Last month, a young woman in ripped jeans and a t-shirt came before me, accused of digital trespassing. The old me would have immediately assumed guilt." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Instead, I listened. Turned out she was a white-hat hacker who had discovered a major security flaw in the banking system. Today, she's consulting for that same bank, helping protect thousands of customers' data." Sarah nodded, bringing up their final slides. "We're releasing a complete toolkit today. Everything you need to implement these changes in your own courts: training materials, expert networks, bias recognition guides. But the most important tool isn't in any of these files. It's the willingness to look past our assumptions," Judge Harrison finished. "To see people for who they really are, not who we expect them to be." As they concluded their presentation, the audience rose in a standing ovation. In the front row, Chief Justice Martinez wiped away a tear, remembering that tense review board meeting a year ago that had started all this. After the applause died down, a young judge raised her hand. "What's next for your program?" Sarah and Judge Harrison exchanged glances. "Well," Sarah smiled, "we're working with law schools to create new courses combining technology and ethics. We're expanding our expert network to include more diverse voices. But most importantly, we're learning every day," Judge Harrison added. "Each new case, each new face in our courtrooms, teaches us something. The moment we think we know everything is the moment we stop serving justice." As they left the stage together, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. Their program was being adopted by courts in 3 more countries. What had started with a wrong judgment in one courtroom had grown into a global movement for change. Not bad for a year's work, Sarah said quietly. Judge Harrison shook his head, smiling. No, not bad at all for a judge who thought he knew everything and a tech expert who proved him wrong.